Every morning presents a unique opportunity, a window of time where your brain is especially receptive to input. This is not motivational fluff, this is neurobiology. Cortisol peaks early in the day, making it the perfect time to prime your nervous system and cognitive state. What you tell yourself in that window can regulate your attention, affect neuroplasticity, and drive long-term behavioral change. So here are 9 things rooted in neuroscience and behavioral science that I recommend you tell yourself each morning to set the conditions for optimal mental and physical performance. First, I am not my thoughts, I am what I do with them. Your brain is a prediction machine, it runs simulations constantly. Some of those simulations are helpful, others are noise. Don't assume every thought is true. Observe, then choose your response. This creates distance between stimulus and reaction, key for neuroplastic rewiring. Second, stress is a signal, not a stop sign. The autonomic nervous system doesn't distinguish between challenge and threat by default. It's how you interpret that arousal. Reframing stress as readiness recruits the prefrontal cortex and shifts your response from reactive to adaptive. Third, I control my visual focus, and that shapes my mental state. Where you look literally can change your brain state. Narrow vision engages stress circuits. Panoramic vision activates the parasympathetic response. Use this tool deliberately. Go outside, soften your gaze, and let your physiology follow forth. Today's actions are tomorrow's brain. Neuroplasticity isn't passive. You don't get the brain you want by thinking alone. You get it by repetition of action under focused attention. What you repeat with emotion and effort, especially early in the day, will reinforce or rewire circuits. Intention is not enough. Behavior matters. Fifth, sleep begins the moment I wake up. The morning sets the clock for the entire circadian rhythm. Get sunlight within 30 to 60 minutes of waking. Move your body. Delay caffeine. These behaviors anchor your sleep-wake cycle and deeply affect mental clarity, hormonal rhythms, and immune function. Sixth, small wins compound. Dopamine isn't just about reward, it's about forward momentum. Accomplishing even one meaningful task early in the day, something that requires effort, gives you a dopamine pulse. That becomes fuel for deeper focus and motivation later. It's a self-reinforcing loop. Start small, go far. Seventh, discomfort is not danger. When you expose yourself to deliberate discomfort, cold, heat, hard effort, you train your nervous system to stay online under stress. This expands what's called your stress buffer, and that translates to better control over your mind and body in high-stakes situations. Eighth, my mind is shaped by my body. Movement isn't just physical, it's chemical. It increases BDNF, improves mood, enhances cognition. Even 5 to 10 minutes of movement in the morning sends a clear signal to your brain, we're awake, we're alive, we're ready to adapt. And finally, my attention is my life. Attention is not infinite. What you pay attention to, especially in the first 90 minutes after waking, will shape your internal state for hours. Avoid digital chaos. Start with intention. Choose input that aligns with your goals, not algorithms. None of this is abstract. These are actionable, biology-informed habits that, when practiced consistently, recalibrate your brain toward resilience, clarity, and performance. The first hour of your day is leverage. Use it well. Every morning, before your feet even touch the floor, your brain is already at work. It's not just a poetic idea, it's a biological fact. The human brain operates according to predictable patterns that are tightly regulated by hormones and circadian rhythms. One of the most important windows in the 24-hour cycle is the first hour after waking, because that's when your nervous system is especially sensitive to internal and external input. This sensitivity is largely due to elevated cortisol levels, which naturally rise in the early morning as part of the circadian wakefulness drive. While cortisol is often misunderstood as a stress hormone, its natural peak in the morning actually helps promote alertness, mobilize energy, and prepare the body for the demands of the day. If you harness this state correctly, by guiding your thoughts and behaviors with intention, you can shape how your brain functions not just for the next few hours, but in the long term as well. Your mindset in the first part of the day acts as a primer for your entire cognitive and emotional framework. This is because the brain is plastic. It changes in response to experience. And the experiences that occur when neuromodulators like cortisol and dopamine are naturally high tend to have a disproportionately large impact. What you tell yourself in the morning matters. It's not motivational fluff or a placebo, it's neurobiological reality. If you wake up and immediately start thinking about everything that might go wrong, if you grab your phone and start scrolling through emails or social media, you are essentially training your brain to associate waking with anxiety, distraction, and chaos. Those associations deepen with repetition. Over time, you're not just reinforcing thoughts, you're wiring in entire circuits that make those thought patterns automatic. By contrast, If you begin the day by directing your attention with conscious effort, you can activate neural pathways that support focus, calm, and resilience. For instance, affirmations or intentional statements, when repeated consistently in the morning, serve as cognitive cues that direct your attentional spotlight. Statements like, "I am not my thoughts, I am what I do with them," or "stress is a signal, not a stop sign," may seem simple, but when spoken or thought during this neurologically sensitive window, they guide your internal narrative. That narrative, in turn, influences the structure and function of your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for executive function, decision-making, and emotional regulation. The way this works is grounded in the interaction between the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex. The limbic system responds automatically to stimuli, generating emotions like fear, anticipation, or excitement. The prefrontal cortex, when engaged, evaluates those emotional signals and chooses how to respond. By using your morning mindset to engage the prefrontal cortex early in the day, you are essentially strengthening its capacity to regulate the more primitive, reactive areas of the brain. This is key to building resilience and maintaining emotional balance throughout the day, especially when confronted with stress. There's also a strong link between early morning mental framing and the default mode network, DMN, a network of brain regions that becomes active when you're not focused on the outside world and are instead engaged in introspection or mind wandering. The DMN is deeply influenced by habitual thought patterns. If your morning routine consistently involves ruminating on problems or dwelling on negative experiences, the DMN will increasingly default to that mode of thinking. But if you begin the day with structured, intentional thought through positive framing, gratitude, or even simple breathing exercises, you begin to reshape the default wiring of your brain. Over time, you don't just change how you think in the morning, you change the baseline of your entire cognitive life. This morning sensitivity to cognitive input also affects your attentional system. Attention is a limited resource, and it is shaped by both top-down processes like intentional focus and bottom-up processes, like distractions or sensory stimuli. If you immediately immerse yourself in digital input, notifications, social media, news headlines, you're handing control of your attentional system to external forces. You become reactive rather than proactive. But if you begin the day by directing your attention inward, by focusing on your breath, reflecting on your goals, or stating key affirmations, you regain control of your cognitive lens. You train the brain to operate from intention, not impulse. Repeated morning practices, especially those that involve verbal affirmation or journaling, also engage the language centers of the brain, including Broca's and Wernicke's areas. Language is not just a communication tool, it's also a cognitive framework. The words you use, even silently in your own mind, encode values and shape expectations. Telling yourself something constructive and intentional first thing in the morning is like laying a track for your train of thought to follow throughout the day. That's why repetition matters. The brain encodes habits not just through exposure, but through consistency under emotionally charged conditions. And morning time, with its heightened neurochemical state, is especially ripe for that encoding. None of this requires extreme discipline or an overhaul of your entire routine. It can start with 1 or 2 sentences you tell yourself as soon as you wake up. The key is to engage with those sentences fully, not mindlessly recite them, but really consider them. That deliberate focus acts as a spotlight that enhances the brain's capacity for plasticity. Over time, the combination of consistent language, intention, and emotion builds new cognitive circuits. You're not just setting a tone for the day, you're shaping the architecture of your mind. So the next time you wake up, don't underestimate the first few minutes. They are not trivial, they are neurobiological leverage. What you tell yourself in that window becomes the scaffolding for how your brain perceives, reacts, and performs today and far beyond. Stress is an unavoidable part of life. It's built into our biology, designed to help us adapt, survive, and perform under pressure. Yet how we interpret and respond to stress makes all the difference between it being destructive or transformative. The statement, "stress is a signal, not a stop sign," captures a fundamental truth about human physiology and psychology. It shifts the narrative from avoidance to awareness and from fear to function. This isn't just motivational language, it's grounded in how the nervous system, brain, and hormones interact to prepare us for action. When you experience stress, what's actually happening inside your body is the activation of your autonomic nervous system, particularly the sympathetic branch. This is what people often refer to as the fight or flight response. Heart rate increases, breathing quickens, pupils dilate, and blood is redirected toward the muscles. Cortisol and adrenaline flood the system, enhancing focus, reaction time, and energy availability. In evolutionary terms, this response allowed humans to respond to threats swiftly, whether facing a predator, escaping danger, or dealing with immediate survival challenges. However, in the modern world, stressors are rarely physical. They are psychological, emotional, and often chronic. Deadlines, financial worries, social pressure, uncertainty about the future, these don't come and go quickly, they linger. And this is where the interpretation of stress becomes critical. Because while the physiological response is the same, cortisol, elevated heart rate, narrowed attention, the way we label that experience determines whether the brain codes it as harmful or as a challenge to overcome, and that labeling directly influences performance, resilience, and long-term health. The work of researchers like Alia Crum at Stanford has shown that simply reframing stress from something to avoid into something that prepares you for performance can change biological outcomes. In one study, people who were taught to view stress responses as helpful, for example, interpreting a racing heart as a sign of readiness rather than anxiety, showed improved cardiovascular function and greater focus. This shift in mindset didn't remove the stress, it changed their relationship to it. The stress became a signal something important is happening. Pay attention. Prepare yourself. It did not become a stop sign that says, you can't handle this. At a neural level, this reinterpretation recruits different circuits in the brain. The amygdala, which is involved in fear and threat detection, becomes active during stress. But when you reframe stress as manageable or even useful, you engage the prefrontal cortex, the center for planning, regulation, and rational thinking. This connection between the emotional and executive parts of the brain is what allows for adaptive behavior under pressure. In simple terms, you can learn to stay online mentally even when your body is reacting strongly. You can stay in the driver's seat rather than becoming a passenger to your biology. It's also important to recognize that stress, when experienced in appropriate doses, is not only safe but beneficial. There's a concept in neuroscience known as hormesis, the idea that a small amount of a challenge or stressor can lead to a greater capacity to handle future stress. This applies across systems. Just as muscles grow stronger in response to micro-tears caused by resistance training, your nervous system becomes more resilient when it is exposed to and recovers from stress. The key lies in the cycle stress followed by recovery. But if you see every stressor as harmful and try to avoid it or shut down, you miss the chance to build that resilience. Another aspect of stress that people often overlook is that it acts as a signal of what matters. You don't get stressed about things you don't care about. If a presentation, conversation, or decision is creating internal tension, it means your brain has identified it as significant. That signal can be used to focus attention and effort. When you learn to listen to stress, not as something to silence, but as something to understand, it becomes a guide. The body says, this is meaningful. The mind's job is to ask, how do I want to respond to this meaning? There's also a profound link between stress and learning. From a neuroplasticity standpoint, experiences that are emotionally charged tend to create stronger memories. If you're pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone, trying something new, speaking publicly, facing uncertainty, your brain is in a heightened state of alertness. This makes it more capable of learning and forming new connections. But that only happens if you stay engaged. If you interpret the discomfort as a threat and disengage, the opportunity for plasticity is lost. That's why how you frame the stress, what you tell yourself in those moments, can determine whether the experience rewires you positively or leaves you stuck in avoidance. Learning to respond to stress constructively also rewires the relationship between effort and reward. Dopamine, the neuromodulator most associated with motivation and drive, is not just released when you achieve success. It is also released during the pursuit of effortful goals, especially when you anticipate and then overcome difficulty. This is what makes challenges feel worthwhile. But if you interpret stress as a sign you're failing or can't handle something, you short-circuit that process. You interrupt the motivation loop and replace it with withdrawal. Ultimately, understanding that stress is a signal and choosing to act on it rather than retreat from it leads to better outcomes across the board. It improves physical health because the body learns to recover more efficiently. It enhances emotional stability because you no longer fear your own reactions. And it strengthens cognitive control because the brain becomes practiced in regulating itself under pressure. Stress is not the enemy, it's data. It tells you what's happening, what matters, and what demands your attention. If you treat it like a stop sign, you will halt your own progress. But if you treat it like a signal, one that can guide you, challenge you, and ultimately shape you, you will move forward with greater clarity, capability, and confidence. The relationship between the body and the mind is not a one-way street. In fact, it's more accurate to say that your mind is constantly being shaped and informed by your body. This understanding has deep roots in both neuroscience and physiology. One of the most underutilized truths in modern life is that simple physical actions, where you place your gaze, how you breathe, how you move, can immediately shift your mental state. That means the body is not just a vessel for the brain, it's a powerful regulatory system that can influence mood, focus, and stress often faster than any cognitive strategy alone. The visual system is one of the most direct pathways through which the body can influence the brain. Where and how you direct your eyes plays a major role in determining your internal state. When you're stressed or anxious, your field of vision narrows. This is a reflexive, sympathetic nervous system response that primes you for threat detection. But the opposite is also true when you deliberately expand your field of view. What's known as panoramic vision, you send a signal to the brain that the environment is safe. This shifts your nervous system from a heightened state of alertness into a more relaxed and grounded mode. Panoramic vision activates the parasympathetic branch of the nervous system, which is associated with calm, rest, and recovery. So just by walking outside in the morning and allowing your gaze to expand, not focusing on a phone or screen, but taking in the horizon or a wide visual landscape, you are literally shifting the balance of your autonomic nervous system. This is not hypothetical, it's measurable. Your heart rate variability increases, your respiration slows, and your brain moves into a more regulated state. This is why time spent in nature or even looking at natural scenery can have such profound effects on mental health and clarity. It's a physiological reset button driven largely by the way your visual system communicates with your limbic and brainstem circuits. Breathing is another powerful lever. It's one of the only functions in the human body that is both automatic and under voluntary control, which makes it uniquely positioned to regulate brain states. When you slow your breathing and extend your exhales, what's known as physiological sighing, you activate the vagus nerve, a core part of the parasympathetic system. This kind of breathing doesn't just help you relax, it signals safety to the brain. It's an ancient cue that the threat has passed, that it's okay to downshift. When you take conscious control of your breathing, even for just 60 to 90 seconds, you change the pattern of signals moving from the body to the brain. These bottom-up signals are incredibly powerful in shifting attention, regulating emotion, and improving mental clarity. Even posture plays a significant role. Standing or sitting upright with the chest open and shoulders back can increase feelings of confidence and reduce stress. This is not just a cultural or symbolic association. It's embedded in your physiology. Posture affects spinal cord feedback, diaphragm function, and even the positioning of internal organs, all of which inform the brain about your physical state. When the body adopts a position associated with alertness and strength, the brain responds by increasing norepinephrine and dopamine, which support alertness and motivation. Conversely, collapsing inward, slouching, folding the arms tightly, or dropping the head sends a signal of defeat or withdrawal, which can suppress these same neurotransmitter systems. Movement is perhaps the most powerful of all body-to-brain modulators. Even light movement, walking, stretching, or standing up can increase blood flow to the brain, elevate neurotrophic factors like BDNF's brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and improve mood. But more importantly, movement is action. It tells the brain that you are engaging with the environment, that you are not frozen or trapped. This has profound implications for people dealing with anxiety or low mood. When you move, you disrupt the feedback loop of helplessness that often accompanies stress or depression. The beauty of all this is that none of it requires deep introspection or long training. You don't have to analyze your emotions for hours to change them. You can shift your state rapidly by using your body as a tool. Look up and outward to reduce stress. Slow your breathing to regain control. Move your body to spark motivation and clarity. These aren't just coping strategies, they're performance tools. High performers in every domain, from athletes to CEOs, use them whether they're aware of the neuroscience or not. They're tapping into the basic wiring of the human nervous system, which evolved to respond to the body's signals long before language or abstract thought existed. There's also a feedback loop at play. When you change your body state and begin to feel better, your thoughts tend to follow. Optimism, creativity, and focus are much easier to access when your body is in a regulated state. This reverses the common assumption that you need to think your way out of a bad mood. In truth, you can often move, breathe, or look your way out of it. And over time, when practiced regularly, these body-based interventions begin to shift your baseline. You don't just feel better temporarily, you recondition your nervous system to respond more flexibly and effectively to challenges. In a world that often prioritizes mental strategies and intellectual insight, it's easy to overlook the role of the body in shaping our experience. But the science is clear. Your body is not separate from your brain. It is part of your brain's regulatory system. Learning to use it skillfully is one of the most accessible and effective ways to change how you feel, think, and perform. The more attuned you become to this, the more empowered you are to take control of your internal state, not through force, but through intelligent, biologically aligned action. Attention is one of the most powerful and limited resources you have. It determines not only what you perceive, but how you interpret reality, how you feel, and how effectively you act. Each morning, as you transition from sleep to wakefulness, your brain enters a critical window in which attentional systems are being tuned. This period, often referred to as the first 90 minutes of wakefulness, is when your nervous system is most malleable and most vulnerable to influence. What you choose to pay attention to during this time has a disproportionate impact on the way your entire day unfolds. Your attention is not just a passive spotlight, it's an active filter. It selects certain inputs and ignores others, and it does this based on both conscious decisions and deeply ingrained neural habits. In neuroscience, attention is linked to specific brain networks, particularly the frontoparietal network and the salience network. These systems are responsible for focusing your cognitive resources on what seems most relevant. The challenge is that in modern life, your attention is under constant attack from external stimuli, notifications, headlines, messages, and endless content streams. If you don't take control of your attention first thing in the morning, something else will. This is why what you do in the first part of the day matters so much. If you immediately reach for your phone and begin consuming input, checking emails, scanning social media, responding to messages, you are handing control of your attentional system to the outside world. Your brain, in this moment of heightened neurochemical sensitivity, starts wiring itself toward reactivity instead of intentionality. You are training your nervous system to expect external triggers and to seek short bursts of stimulation rather than sustained focus. Over time, this weakens your capacity for deep work, emotional regulation, and creative thinking. On the other hand, if you begin the day by directing your attention intentionally, by focusing on breath, movement, natural light, or meaningful affirmations, you engage neural systems that support long-term focus, emotional stability, and cognitive flexibility. The neurotransmitters involved in attention, such as dopamine, acetylcholine, and norepinephrine, are highly responsive to behavior. When you give your attention to something meaningful and effortful first thing in the morning, you are essentially reinforcing the neural circuits that support purpose-driven behavior. You are building the habit of cognitive control, one of the most valuable tools for well-being and performance. It's important to understand that attention is not something you either have or don't have. It's a skill, and like any skill, it can be trained. Every time you resist distraction and bring your focus back to something important, whether it's your breath, your goal for the day, or the task at hand, you are reinforcing specific neural pathways. The brain's ability to do this is governed by neuroplasticity, which is especially potent during the morning hours due to elevated levels of cortisol and dopamine. These neuromodulators enhance the brain's ability to form new connections and break old ones. That means the habits of attention you build in the morning don't just shape your day, they shape your brain. Another key aspect is that attention influences emotion. Where your attention goes, your emotional energy follows. If you begin your day focused on negativity, on stress, problems, or comparisons, you begin to wire your brain for vigilance and anxiety. The limbic system becomes more active, and you start to interpret neutral events through a lens of threat or insufficiency. But if you focus on something positive even for a few moments, gratitude, a clear goal, a breath of calm, you activate a different network. You calm the amygdala, engage the prefrontal cortex, and begin to shift your baseline state toward one of clarity and intention. Your attention also determines what you learn. From a neurobiological perspective, learning is gated by attention. If you aren't paying attention, your brain doesn't encode information effectively, no matter how useful it may be. That's why distractions are so costly. They not only pull you away from tasks, they disrupt the very process of memory formation. This is especially true in the morning when your brain is trying to update itself based on the previous day and prepare itself for new input. If you squander this time on shallow or meaningless content, you interfere with that natural process of consolidation and preparation. One of the best ways to train attention in the morning is to engage in something that requires effortful focus, reading, journaling, meditation, or physical movement with intention. These activities create what's called a dopaminergic tone, meaning they elevate and stabilize your levels of dopamine in a way that supports sustained motivation. Unlike the dopamine spikes from social media or fast entertainment, this tone is steady and self-reinforcing. It primes the brain for deeper engagement throughout the day. Once established, This tone makes it easier to return to focus after interruptions and harder to get pulled into compulsive distraction. Your attention also affects your identity. What you focus on repeatedly becomes part of how you see yourself. If you give your attention to growth, discipline, and clarity each morning, you begin to see yourself as someone who is disciplined, focused, and in control. This becomes a reinforcing loop. Your identity shapes your attention, and your attention strengthens that identity. But if your mornings are consumed by chaotic input and reactive patterns, the opposite loop begins to form. You start to see yourself as scattered, overwhelmed, or always behind. There's no need to make this complicated. You don't have to build a perfect morning routine or eliminate every distraction overnight. The key is to understand that every morning is an opportunity to train your brain. Even a few minutes of intentional attention can make a difference. The circuits you activate most frequently become stronger. The more you practice directing your attention where you choose rather than where the world pushes, you gain a kind of autonomy that is increasingly rare and incredibly valuable. Attention is the gatekeeper of your life. It's what allows you to decide what matters, how to feel, and what kind of person you want to become. Every morning, you have a fresh chance to practice. The question is simple: will you use your attention to shape your day, or will you let the day shape your attention? The answer to that question determines more than just your productivity. It determines the quality of your life. Each morning is a fresh beginning, an opportunity to reset your mind, regulate your nervous system, and direct your life with intention. What you say to yourself, how you interpret stress, how you engage your body, and where you place your attention are not small choices. They are foundational acts of self-direction that shape your entire day. These aren't just motivational ideas. They are grounded in biology, supported by neuroscience, and proven through lived experience. If you practice even a few of these principles consistently, you'll begin to notice real, lasting change. You'll feel more centered, more capable, and more in control, not because life is easier, but because you've trained your mind and body to meet it with clarity and strength. The morning is not just a time to wake up. It's a time to train your system to thrive.